Hans Niemann is still trying to win the Djerba Masters tournament after losing painfully in round 6. He still has a chance to win the event, but he's half a point behind the tournament leader and therefore he needs to play for a win with the black pieces. His opponent is a young grandmaster from Algeria, Bellahcene, and Hans is playing with black, needs to play for a win to retain a theoretical chance to win the event. But let's first see the game and then at the end of the video I will tell you how this tournament finished. Well, Hans is playing with black and against the move 1 e4 he plays the sharpest opening out there. He goes for the Sicilian and he picks the Najdorf variation. So after d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3, he goes for the move a6. So very standard, well-known opening line. And now white goes for the move bishop g5, and after e6 we have the first surprise of the game, because the most common way of playing here for white is to play the move f4, after which you get your queen out to f3 and castling queenside. This is all pretty standard, but Bellahcene goes for the move queen f3 straight away, which is interesting. He's preparing to castle queenside, but I think it's less aggressive than in the situation in which the pawn is on f4, because with a pawn on f4 white is looking for ways to open up the center, either with e5 or with f5. But now the game gets different dynamics and I think objectively speaking it should not be too problematic for black. Well, Hans goes for the move h6, so it's questioning the bishop on g5, and okay, you can take on f6, but in general when pieces are getting exchanged, white's initiative is not gonna mean anything special. So therefore Bellahcene decides to go back with the bishop to e3, and now interesting decision by Hans as he played the move e5. He's attacking the knight on d4. Well, the knight goes back to b3 and here the bishop comes out to g4 to hit the queen on f3, and now you may think, okay, the queen is actually better placed on g3, but after knight bd7, f3, attacking the bishop goes back to e6, and the reason why Hans played it in this way is that now with the bishop on e6 and the queen not being placed on f3, white has less grip on the d5 square, so white is not able to jump in straight away with that knight to d5. Well, therefore, castling queenside was played. Now rook c8 on the board, typical move in the Sicilian to get the rook to the half open file. And well, for those who are familiar with these structures, you often also get the chance to launch an exchange sacrifice. This is a very interesting idea, so that after taking back with the b-pawn, white's queenside formation is quite vulnerable and black has good chances to build up an initiative on that side of the board. But anyway, white didn't allow that exchange sacrifice, played here the move knight to d5. So knight takes d5 played, e takes d5, attacking the bishop on e6, and well, the bishop doesn't have many squares to go to, so the bishop goes to f5. However, inserting the move queen c7, threatening checkmate, could have been a nice way to play so, because now white cannot put the bishop on d3. If you put the bishop on d3, then the pawn on d5 can be taken as well. So I think queen c7 could have been a nice way to improve your position on that side of the board. But okay, Hans played the move bishop f5, bishop d3 played, and now the bishops are coming off the board. So here we have a situation in which the queen on g3 makes it harder for black to castle kingside, because the bishop is on f8, and even if you get your bishop out, which is not really possible because it hangs the pawn on g7, also in situations with castling kingside, there's always bishop takes h6. So there is pressure on black's kingside. On the other hand, the situation in the center is still close, so black has time to do something about it. Played here the move g6. That's an interesting move, but white is now trying to open up the position so that black's king, if the center will get opened, let's say if you take on f4, which is a terrible move, there is bishop takes f4, the pawn on d6 is under threat, the rooks are coming to the e file, and the black king will get crushed. So you need to come up with a solution for that. And well, Hans comes up with a very creative idea as he played here the move h5. So the idea is to tickle the queen on g3. Rook f1 was played, so white is hoping to open up the f file at the right moment, but black played the move h4. The queen comes to h3, and white has even ideas here to push the pawn to f5 and challenge the pawn on g6. But Hans, look at what he's doing here, played the move rook h5. That's a very spectacular idea, so that the rook joins play, the king is still safe in the center, and black still has a nice grip on the e5 square. So if white would ever take, you can recapture with a piece. Doesn't look problematic at all. Well, I think it's just a very complicated middle game position, but technically speaking, even if you make a waiting move here like king b1, black is not doing badly here at all after something like bishop g7 and the game goes on. But Bellahcene had a different idea in mind, played here the move f5, but I don't know what he missed, but definitely this is not a good move, because now the queen comes in to f6, attacking the pawn on f5. The pawn cannot take on g6, because then the rook on f1 is hanging. It's unprotected. Bellahcene played here the move knight a5. Well, this was his idea. Now the queen is no longer guarding that a5 square, but it seems to me that after taking on f5, rook takes f5, queen takes, queens are coming off the board as well, but here these pawns there look quite nice in an endgame together. These pawns, they can march forward, and even though white still had a chance here to regain the pawn, let's say if you take on b7, I think the key idea here for black is to play the move h3. It's a very nice technical move. If you do take the pawn, well then the pawns are coming forward. You can play e4, you can play f5. These pawns in the center are way stronger than these double pawns on the h-file or the pawns on the queen side. And if you don't take on h3, let's say you play the move g3, well, the knight can come into f6, and the plan is to go knight g4, and you see that the pawn on h2 is a serious weakness. Together with that pawn on h3, there are serious chances to create a passed pawn at some point there as well. But this didn't happen. The pawn on b7 was not captured. There followed bishop f2 to hit the pawn on h4, and here Hans played the move knight c5. He's protecting the pawn on b7, hits the rook on d3, so that's an interesting idea, and the rook goes away, goes to c3. So here you see there are even ideas to play the move b4 to attack the knight on c5, and the knight is pinned because the rook on c8 is unprotected. So black played here b6. Understandable move to attack the knight on a5, and here the knight comes into b7. So if you do take that knight, there's rook takes c8. That's the idea. But okay, you don't have to take. You can just play here the move king d7, which is a great move, after which the rook on c8 is defended, and black even has ideas now to take the knight. So knight takes c5. How are you going to take back? Well, not with the rook, because the bishop covers the knight. Still, you may even consider taking back with a d-pawn, so that later on your king can come to d6 to hit the pawn on d5. But Hans played the move b takes c5. So he is getting a very nice pawn center. But okay, first the pawn on h4 is taken. How is black going to play? Well, Hans developed the bishop to h6 with check. King goes to d1, and now Hans pushes his pawn to f4. So he is ready to advance the other pawn as well, and it's clear that black's pawns, they are quite nice. So let's do the material count. By the way, white is having 6 pawns, black also having 6 pawns, so material is still even, and white is looking for a way to infiltrate with his rook on b7, but black does the same. Black ignores the threat, at least for now, goes for a rook g8, attacking the pawn on g2. So even if you give a check on b7, you can go king c8, give up the pawn on f7, but after rook takes g2, this looks very dangerous, because now black is having 2 connected passed pawns. They can come forward. However, apparently, if you play something like rook f6, this bishop on h6 is somewhat in trouble. If you go bishop g7, there's rook f7, and apparently it's very difficult to do something here as black, because the rook got to keep the bishop defended, and also the pawns, they cannot really come forward, because if you move the f-pawn, the f-pawn will be taken. So the rook is fantastically placed on f7. Well, anyway, this didn't happen. I think white should have gone for this, but instead he played here the move g3. King c7, rook a3. So now you're no longer able to infiltrate on the b file, but you hit the pawn on a6. King b6, rook b3. Now white is basically offering a repetition of moves if the king goes back, but instead Hans needs to play for a win. Goes for king a7. Very understandable and still very complicated endgame. A lot of ideas for black to keep improving his position, including just marching forward with the f-pawn. White still has different ideas, can try to centralize the king. I think that's a very sensible idea, so that with your king you're trying to stop the enemy's pawns. But here, Bellahcene decides to take on f4. Bishop takes f4, hitting the pawn on h2. Bishop to g3, and now the bishops are getting exchanged. White is getting a pawn on g3, which makes it harder for the f-pawn to come forward. I think still f5 is a good idea, but at least f4 is not very attractive, because I don't think black really wants to exchange these pawns. This pawn on g3 is a weakness. So what we get to see in the game is a different plan. Black play the move c4 to attack the rook and hoping to force the white rook to give up the protection of that pawn on g3. Well, rook b4 was played, so at least you're cutting off the king. Black was really hoping to come closer with the king to c5. That is not possible here yet. You may take on g3, but then rook takes c4 is still an option, and very soon the rook will come to c6 and starts hitting the pawns from behind. So Hans tries to keep the tension on the board, played here the move rook g4, supporting the pawn on c4. White played the move b3. Maybe not the best move, but very understandable, as the pawn is pinned and you're trying to make use of the unprotected rook on g4. But a5 is played here, attacking the rook, and black is setting up a little trap here, because going into this king and pawn endgame by taking on c4 is just that lost. The king comes in to c5, and after king d2, king c5, king d3, you play the move f5, and white has a very difficult time here to keep the pawn on c4 defended. So therefore in the game rook b5 was played, and well, there are various options. You can take on b3, but that basically will help the weaker side, white in this case, to break free. So the move played by Hans, I think it's very nice idea. He played the move c3, and this pawn maybe later a nice attacking weapon against the king on d1. So for instance, if you would take on a5, which was not played in the game, the king comes in, rook a4. Now you can take on g3, and this pawn makes it harder for white's king to become active. The plan is very simple, very straightforward, to bring up your f-pawn. However, if white puts the rook on c4, with the idea to go to c6 and cut off the king, well, probably white should be able to hold. But instead, they follow the move king to e2. Rook takes g3, rook takes a5 check, king to b6. The rook goes to a4. And, well, here, there are different ideas. I was thinking that bringing the king to the center, that's the way to go. You would like to win the pawn on d5. If you go rook c4, king takes d5, black is just a pawn up. That doesn't look good for white at all. If you instead go rook to a5 check to attack the king, keep the pawn defended, well, then the king comes into d4. And here you see that with ideas like rook to g2 coming next, the pawn on c2 is in deep trouble. Also, there are mating ideas even when the king can come into to e3. So, yeah, white has to be careful. But Hans played differently. Strangely enough, he didn't play king c5. He went for rook g2, king d3. Now, he can still go for rook g3 and repeat moves and then go for the same idea to bring up the king. But he goes for this move, rook d2. And after king takes c3, rook takes d5. Somehow this position reminds me of the game he had yesterday. Well, that was even sharper, as in that position it was like one side having 3 pawns on one side and the opponent having 3 pawns at the other side of the board. It was a really strong pawn race. Now the c pawn and the d pawn, they are still standing in each other's way. So basically both sides have only 2 passed pawns, but it's a very unusual and sharp endgame. Who is coming first here? Well, the big question is, of course, how to place the rooks. Well, I think white makes very instructive mistake. By giving a check on b4, you're only helping black to bring the king to the center, to support the pawns. The king is absolutely safe there. What should white have done instead is to bring back the rook to e4. Now, if you go f5 and rook e1, you will see that it will be harder for the pawns to come forward, because the rook is a good defender in this case. Well, let's see what happened in the game after rook b4, king c6, rook c4, king d7. White played the move b4, but now black also advances his pawn. So after a4, now the pawn goes to f4. The pawn is just only 3 squares away. And look at that rook on c4. It will not be in time to get back. So white goes for the move a5. And before advancing the pawn, which maybe still gives white a chance to play something like rook h4 and try to come back, first rook d1 is played. And that's a very good move, because now the rook is both supporting the pawn by controlling the queening square, and after the move a6, the rook can even get behind to control that pawn on a6. Well, there followed b5 to protect the pawn, and black is really fast, only 2 squares away from queening. b6, f2, only 1 square away. King c7, sorry, rook c7, and now the king just gets out of the checks. It's absolutely safe on e6. It even prevents, for instance, if you would go back to d8 with your king, then rook f7 was still an idea. And there's no time to queen here because of rook takes queen, rook takes, and white's pawns are way too strong. Rook a1, b7, and black is unable to stop both pawns simultaneously. White is winning. Okay, after king d8, rook f7, instead of queening, you could go rook takes a6, rook takes f2, and this should probably lead to a 2 versus 1 endgame, which is a theoretical draw. But Hans played it much better, as I said. He put the king on e6, so the king will not be annoyed. You prevent the rook from coming to f7. There followed the move b7. Black queens the f-pawn first, b8 queen. So here again, like in the race we have seen yesterday, both sides getting a new queen. But now after queen f3, it's just going to be checkmate in a few moves. Here, white resigned. If you go king b2, it's queen a3 with checkmate. Beautiful mate with the support of the rook. If you go king d2, it's again, this time the rook who's giving a checkmate. Beautiful cooperation once again. So the only move would be here king c4, but after queen d5, check. The king can't go to the b file. At least you can win the queen or maybe give mate by force. But after king c3, queen d4, king goes to b3, rook b1, king a2, queen a1 is checkmate. So it's checkmate in all the lines, and that means Hans at least managed to win. And also the game between Djerba and Niemann ended in a draw, but thanks to a better SB score for Djerba, he was declared as the tournament winner, and Hans felt really upset about it. He really thinks that when tying for first, there should be a blitz playoff to determine who is the tournament winner. And frankly speaking, I think it's also more exciting if that would have been done. But anyway, probably it has been stated differently in the tournament rules before the tournament, so there's not much to complain. I hope for Hans that the prize money was still equally shared, but well, in certain cases that's not happening either. But anyway, I thought it was a very exciting game by Hans. Hopefully you like this game as well. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, and if you really like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll really appreciate all the support, and very soon much more exciting games here.